Hey everybody, it's Chainsaw. Today's video is a video response to a good buddy of mine, Midnightstrike3625, who uploaded a video last night as I'm recording this video entitled, Are Clean Vocals in Modern Metal Outdated? Or basically, are clean vocals in metal outdated? And basically just asked the question, is growling and screaming in vocals, is that what it's come to fully in metal 100%? Or are clean vocals still around? We're just not used to it as much as we were back in the day when metal was like in the 80s, no growls and screams, and eventually to the 2013, it's kind of the norm. It asks the question, is it outdated? And two things pop in my mind, that go through my mind thinking about this question, because me and him actually had a conversation on the phone yesterday about this the day he actually recorded his video about this topic. And there are some bands that have come through that I've discovered that do clean vocals strictly. There are bands that I've discovered that do growls and screams, and then they do some singing as well, kind of the hybrid of both worlds. The older world of the classic singing, and then we have the growls and screams, and they've kind of combined those together, which I personally believe that's the best form, is having both growls and screams for the more darker and heavy stuff, and then singing for maybe some heavy stuff, but more of a, a melodic vibe, more of the calmer side of the band, having both worlds of singing and growling and screaming into one. But I will have to say that clean singing in general, strictly just 100% clean singing, is really hard to come by in new bands, especially new bands. Now, older bands still putting out material that were back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s doing singing strictly are still doing that. Well, yes, because that's their style. But you rarely come across a new band these days that strictly is 100% singing. The only couple of bands I can think of, or a few basically albums I can think of that I've talked about or I've discovered or band-wise that sticks to strictly singing, the new Stead album, Heavy Metal Music, and the EP earlier this year was entitled Metal, I believe. I can't remember. I'm brain dead right now. But that's not strictly growling or screaming, because he's not really doing that. He does go a little bit lower on his voice. But Jason Newsted's doing basically his voice he was doing back in Metallica, doing backup. He's basically just singing his type of way, which is kind of dark. But he's not really screaming that much. He's more of just, speaking words. I talked about an album that earlier this year or last year, I can't remember when I reviewed it exactly. Mark Tremonti's All I Was solo project was strictly singing. His singing ability is very amazing. He has great vocals, but he doesn't have the capability of screaming and growling, so he sticks with singing, and it works very well. And that album was a heavy metal / thrash album. And I've heard of these newer bands and bands that probably I just discovered one time that does stick to singing, but it's very far and few between, because I think the norm is growling and screaming. I think that's the normal thing, that bands are inspired by these bands that are already doing growling and screaming, and they're just going to follow suit. But back to the whole question, I think that it's getting to that point, and I'm hoping that at some point there's going to be kind of a break in the system, a break in the fragment of time, where more and more bands will start coming out that have maybe strictly singing, or more singing than growling and screaming. Because kind of the norm is either you discover a band that's 100% growls and screams, or a band that kind of has 50-50 or whatever the numbers is, but there's singing and growls and screams involved. And then there are very few bands that still release music that have singing, but then there's so fewer bands coming out that have strictly just 100% singing, no growls and screams involved. And so I'm hoping that the break in time, the break in, this whole line of just keep following the same formula will finally break in a few years down the road, or something like that, to where more bands will feel more comfortable just sticking with singing, because it's the traditional way of metal. People might say it wasn't good metal. They'll say it wasn't dark enough. But it's kind of like, I think it's kind of needed. There's some metal, I understand, that singing doesn't really fit, like brutal, technical death metal, or, brutal grindcore. Singing would be weird. I understand that. But I think that for the majority of metal genres that are available to us to listen to at any given point in time, I think that singing in some moments, that when there's not singing, maybe should be there. Maybe it will, enhance this part or do something here. But overall, I think that it is getting to that point where it is, because seriously, after thinking about this whole topic and this whole discussion, there are so few bands that I listen to now that are 100% strictly singing. The majority of bands I listen to are screaming and growling and singing combined into one, which I think is perfectly fine. It's a good hybrid. It's a good choice. But it gets to the point where, you know, it's time to listen to something different. And it's really hard to find bands nowadays that stick 100% singing. So maybe it will change. Maybe things will change. I don't know. But for right now, we got to deal with what we got to deal with. Eventually, bands hopefully will switch to singing, or 100%, or maybe more singing than growls and screams. But until that point, it's just something where if you discover a band that's 100% singing and you like it, great. Stick with it, because there's not a lot of bands that do that anymore. So, yeah, my answer to the whole question, the big 6-minute talk, it's getting to that point. So, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you check the description for Midnight Strike 3625's original video on the topic. And I hope you guys like this. And comment down below and let me know your opinion about this as well. Thank you guys for watching. See ya.